Hi, my name is Samantha Edlow, and for my Journey Box project, I decided to create it based on Ruby Bridges and the overall concept or uh, focus of school integration. Right now, I'm student teaching in kindergarten, and so what better use of my knowledge than kindergarten standards? So, for the standards that I chose for this project, I chose for kindergarten, exploring how events of the past affect students' lives and community, as well as with prompting and support, generate questions about individuals and groups from stories shared. My objective that for my students would be students will understand that people worked to make schools fair for everyone and that their choices can help others. For my children's book, I of course chose the story I Am Ruby Bridges, which was written by Ruby Bridges and illustrated by Nicholas Smith. This is a true story that follows Ruby Bridges, a 6-year-old girl who became the first Black child to attend an all white elementary school in the South. Despite facing protests and challenges, Ruby showed bravery and helped change schools forever. And so this book is available for purchase on Amazon, and this book is also available as a read aloud on YouTube for free. The story is really amazing. It's a very age appropriate story that gives students an insight into some of the things that Ruby Bridges endured in order for um, there to be equality in schools for desegregation. So I think this is obviously a perfect story for the topic that of my journey box. For my reference materials, I have a collection of resources, of course. So, first is the National Women's History Museum. They have a section on Ruby Bridges. And for this website, it provides a clear, student friendly biography of Ruby Bridges, along with historical context about school integration. It's great for background knowledge and can help teachers build mini lessons or read aloud discussions. I think this is perfect, especially when pulling facts to share with your students about Ruby Bridges and to pull historical context of things that were going on in that time period for your students. Moving on, was my next one is the National Geographic's This Road to School Desegregation. This resource explains the overarching understanding of the civil rights movement in a kid-friendly language with visuals and key vocabulary. And so your students can explore independently, or you can use a whole group to deepen understanding of fairness and equality. For kindergarten, I would use this whole group for sure. But I think this is great for any grade level when talking about school integration and specifically Ruby Bridges and some of the things that the public figures of the civil rights movement endured. It gives a really good explanation of some of the things that happened and what happened to desegregate schools. Um, my next one is another read aloud, The Story of Ruby Bridges. This is written by George Ford, so from a different author. And this read aloud video is more interactive, and it helps students engage with the story of Ruby Bridges through listening and visuals. So in this video, the visuals kind of come alive a little bit more, so the students could connect a little bit deeper. It's especially helpful for younger learners in order to teach some of the experiences that she endured. Um, and lastly is the Library of Congress. They have or not, sorry, not lastly, but my next source is the Library of Congress, primary sources on school integration. This website is perfect, specifically when pulling those sources like photographs, interviews, and historical documents from the civil rights era. Teachers can use these to introduce real world evidence and build inquiry-based lessons. You will see that I did pull later in my journey box from this source an interview from Ruby Bridges. It's amazing for finding interviews, finding real pictures of um, historical figures. Really helpful when pulling those real documentation. My last one for my reference materials is the Learning for Justice website. This resource offers lesson plans, videos, and strategies for teaching social justice topics. It's useful for designing discussions about fairness, inclusion, and community in elementary classrooms. This resource is specifically about integration and some of the justices that the justice for specifically people of color are using. And it's really great for specifically with lesson plans and videos and strategies for teaching them, um, especially since there is conversation and some hesitation with teaching these topics. And so this is like a perfect resource when you're teaching these topics to refer to. Okay, so my next section is primary and secondary sources. So my first source that I chose was a photograph of Ruby Bridges entering school. And so some of the questions I might ask, what do you see in this picture? How do you think Ruby Bridges might be feeling? What makes you think that? And why is this moment important in history? I think it's really important for students to see pictures of the real people instead of just cartoons from read alouds, so they can connect that this is a real person and this really happened. An excerpt from this. My next one is an excerpt from the story of Ruby Bridges by George Ford. So this read aloud that I from my reference materials that I pulled. So the excerpt reads, "They all did get their education, Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in second grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools be desegregated so that children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the France school. She graduated from it, then went on to graduate from high school." So I think my questions that I would ask: who is the main character? What challenges did Ruby face when going to school? And how did Ruby's actions help change school for others? I think this excerpt is really great for that last question. How did her actions help change schools for others? Um, and I think it's really amazing to show that this young girl was able to make such an impact, and that all of the students were able to go to school together. And I think it's a really good look into how Ruby changed the way that schools look today. Um, I found an article about school integration. It's called "How We Got Here and How We Move Forward." That is from the Learning for Justice resource. So some questions I might ask: what is this article mostly about? How did people react to school integration? And why do you think people had different opinions about integration? Just getting them to think deeper a little bit more about, this is specifically for the civil rights movement as a whole and some different things that happened in that timeline. And so getting our students to think deeper into how did people react, and how do people, why do you think they had different opinions, and kind of getting them to think a little bit deeper, a little bit more inferential and evaluative questions. um, my next resource is the Civil Rights Movement, National Geographic's Kids. This is the road to school desegregation again. Some questions that I would choose: what was the civil rights movement? What were people trying to change? And how are the changes from the civil rights movement still important today? I think it's important for our students to not only understand this and understand history, um, for them to understand why they need to know it. Why do they need to understand these things that happened so long ago? It's so that we're not continuing to make these same mistakes and we can change from them. And this last resource potentially is my favorite of all of these. And it's the Ruby Bridges interview at the Library of Congress. And this is what she said: "I understood why I didn't see any other kids in the school. And finally, when I did encounter other kids, it was very evident to me that no one looked like me, that I was not only the only child until I ran across these kids that were being hidden from me, but definitely the only Black person in the school. It made sense what being the first one meant. I understood then that it was about me and the color of my skin." And I think that's just such a powerful um, uh, quote from her to read to your students. Of course, my questions: who's speaking in the interview, so they understand who we're talking about. What does she say about her experience? What can we learn from her about making fair choices? I think this is really powerful for our students to understand the gravity and of what Ruby did for all children of color. Our schools became desegregated and integrated, and that's why our schools look the way that they do now. And I think it's really powerful and for our students to understand that a child that was their age or around their age was able to make such an impact. So for my arts infusion, my first lesson that I created was a visual art lesson. And so my title was, What Does Equality Look Like? And what I would want is for my students to create an illustration showing what fairness looks like in our classroom. So what does fairness look like in our school and in our community? So what I would love for them to do is I would show them a painting and discuss what they noticed. We would read the story of Ruby Bridges and then create a drawing of a classroom scene where everyone is included. My next lesson is titled Standing Up for What's Right. This is a drama lesson, and my essential question was, how can we help others when something's unfair? And so my objective for my students is my students would act out ways to respond kindly and fairly in classroom situations. Again, how would I teach this? I would read the Ruby Bridges story, a different story, or another story from the civil rights movement. We would discuss bravery, and then we would do a short role play showing unfair behavior and then a fair solution. Although this might not tie directly into race, we could have it tied directly into race, but also other ways of being unfair and how we can make sure that we're being fair in our classroom and in our communities. My last lesson that I created was We All Belong. This is a music lesson, and so my question was, why is it important that everyone belongs and feels included? My objective was students will create and perform a simple class song about fairness and inclusion. And so, how would I teach it? We would brainstorm words about inclusion: kindness, fair, friend, welcome. We might create a rhythm, and then we would create some lyrics together. Of course, it would be very simple. I would probably have a sentence frame, and then we would attach, for my younger grades, we would attach those words that we came up with for inclusion into our song. Okay. And so for my arts infusion, using the arts definitely helps deepen understanding because it allows our students to see, feel, and express social studies concepts. It engages them, allows them to connect emotionally to topics like fairness and equality, and it just makes the learning more meaningful and lasting overall. And so lastly, my summary of this project. I chose this topic because it's an important part of American history and it teaches students about fairness, courage, and equality. Ruby Bridges was only 6 years old. She was a young student and she really changed the trajectory of what schools look like today. And so I think it's really powerful for our young students to see a child, a real person who was close to their age, who made a difference simply by going to school. And I think it connects strongly to the values I hope to build in my future classroom: kindness, inclusion, and respect. Obviously, it connects to social studies. It helps students learn about history, citizenship, and how communities change over time. I think this topic is still relevant for our students, although this happened, 50 years ago. It's still really powerful for our students to understand. Students need to understand both the progress of our country and also the challenges people faced to create equality. They're the next generation. They're going to make changes. Those are the children that are going to be making changes for the way our country will look in the future. And so it's important for them to understand where we've been and what we've learned. Um, and so in my future classroom, of course, I would teach this topic through read alouds, followed by discussions and art-based activities. They could use drawings and role playing and music to teach about, to engage in the learning. I would use visuals, partner talks, and modeling to support all my learners. Um, and I would also connect the lesson to classroom expectations. I set the understanding in my classroom of everyone is welcome. That is something that I say almost every day in my classroom. And so I would connect that to the expectation that I've set for my students. Um, I think one question that is always a little difficult nowadays, which I hate, is how to teach these historical topics in a way that is considered appropriate for our young students. I think it's necessary for our students to understand these things. Some people disagree. And so I think making sure that we're teaching it in a way that is accepted by most people, I think can be challenging nowadays, which is personally I find disappointing. Um, But my biggest takeaway from this topic is that history becomes more meaningful when students can connect emotionally to real people and stories. My biggest takeaway from this course is that social studies can be engaging, creative, and integrated with many other subjects. It can be integrated into your writing time. It can be integrated into your reading comprehension. It can be integrated not only into your social studies time, but also into your arts. And social studies is truly about helping students become thoughtful, informed, and caring citizens, which is always our goal is for our students to be well-rounded, um, contributing members of society. So thank you.